she whispered. "You'll regret choosing me." The rancher smiled. "I already regret waiting this long." Dry Hollow, Arizona Territory, late summer 1883. Dust curled beneath the boots of men and the wheels of wagons as the midday sun scorched the main square of Dry Hollow. The air smelled of sweat, livestock, and something worse, desperation. The auction yard buzzed with rough voices, laughter, the sound of coins clinking in dirty palms. Eliza May Harrow stood barefoot on a splintered wooden crate, wrists bound before her with rope frayed from too much use. Her face was stray with dust and sweat. A thin line of dried blood traced down from her temple to her cheek. Her dress, once sky blue, was torn and stained with travel, time, and struggle, but her chin stayed high. Her shoulders, though trembling, were not bowed. She had learned long ago that crying earned nothing but cruelty. There were bruises on her arms. Her lips were dry and cracked. But her eyes, pale green, and sharp as broken glass, stared back at every man who dared look at her like she was less than human. "White, strong, and not broken in yet," barked the auctioneer, his vest yellowed with sweat and spit. "She's young, pretty enough if you clean her up. Who's starting at $10? "10." A few men chuckled. One called out, "5." Another shouted, "I'll go 7 if she keeps quiet." The crowd laughed. Eliza's mouth twitched. She swallowed hard and thought, "Do not cry, do not beg, do not give them the satisfaction." 8. Another man shouted. The auctioneer raised his voice. 8. Who give me 9? 9 for the girl. "I will," came a low voice from the edge of the crowd. "But I will not pay 8. Heads turned. The laughter died down as boots thudded across the dry earth. Griffin Caldwell stepped forward, tall and solid, dressed in worn brown canvas, and a wide-brimmed hat that cast a shadow over his eyes. A silver star glinted faintly on his belt, not a badge of law, but a simple buckle engraved with a smith's crest. His hands were thick, scarred, and still held the black of iron dust in the creases. He walked straight toward the platform, meeting no one's eye until he looked up at Eliza. "I will pay $1, he said, his voice even steady, "and not a cent more." The auctioneer blinked. $1? Are you? $1, Griffin repeated. "Not to own her, to free her." A murmur ran through the crowd. "She ain't a stray dog you can just buy out of pity," one man muttered. Griffin didn't respond to that. His gaze never left Eliza. Slowly, without hurry, he stepped onto the platform. The auctioneer, sensing the shift in air, backed off. No one else spoke. The heat pressed down, heavy and breathless. Griffin pulled a silver coin from his pocket and placed it on the edge of the crate. Then he reached for the ropes binding Eliza's wrists. She flinched. Her muscles tightened, eyes narrowing as though expecting a blow. He hesitated. His hands didn't force, they offered. When she didn't pull away, he untied her gently, unwinding the rope with slow, careful movements. When the last loop slipped free, she staggered slightly. Her arms dropped to her sides, red welts blooming where the rope had bitten in. She did not thank him. She did not move. She leaned close, her voice just a breath, the faintest vibration between them. "You'll regret choosing me," she whispered, words barely louder than wind. Griffin bent slightly, just enough for his reply to be shared in the same hush. "I already regret waiting this long." For a heartbeat neither moved. Then he stepped back and held out his hand, not in command but in offering. She didn't take it, but she stepped off the crate beside him. And in that moment the crowd faded. The heat, the flies, the cruelty, they all vanished under the weight of something stronger, a man who acted instead of talking, and a girl who dared, despite everything, to walk forward, outskirts of Dry Hollow, late afternoon. The desert road stretched long and cracked beneath the weight of the sun. Dust rose with every step, every hoof beat at. Griffin led the way on foot. Reins of his horse looped casually in one hand, his shoulders broad and quiet. Behind him, Eliza walked 10 paces back. her eyes darting from left to right, calculating escape paths, weighing her chances. She kept her head down, her hands still raw from the rope. Each sound, the screech of a hawk, the creak of the saddle, made her flinch. Her lips were sealed tight, and when she spoke to herself in her head, it was only to repeat the lesson. Life had taught her too well. No one gives without taking. After 2 hours of silence, the trail narrowed through a grove of dying mesquite trees. It was there the ambush came. A group of 3 men stepped into the path, rough-looking, dust-caked, one with a scar that split his cheek wide like an open seam. "Well, well," the scarred man drawled, eyes fixed on Eliza. "Look what the wind blew back." Eliza froze, her breath caught in her chest. Her fingers twitched toward her boot where nothing, no weapon, waited. She ran. Boys, the man sneered, did not expect her to land herself a new owner. Griffin stepped between them. "She is not owned," he said, his voice low but clear. The man scoffed. "You paid for her, did you not?" Griffin pulled his coat back just enough to show the holster on his hip. With emotion fluid and without drama, he drew the revolver, pointed it toward the dirt, but close enough to matter. "She is with me," he said. "Anyone touches her, they answer to me." A beat of silence. Then the scarred man raised his hands, smirking. "Easy, friend," he muttered. "No need for thunder." Griffin did not move until the men were gone, their laughter fading with the dust they kicked up. Then he turned slightly, just enough to speak without facing her. "You coming?" he asked. Eliza's voice was dry when she finally spoke. "You did not ask who they were. No, you did not ask why they knew me. No, why?" He looked at her fully then, eyes dark and unreadable. "Because you are still walking beside me." They said nothing more until they reached the edge of his ranch. A modest spread tucked between 2 ridges, the fences sturdy, the house small but strong, windows shuttered to the wind. He pointed toward the right side of the house. "That room's yours, locks on the inside, you'll find a basin and fresh water." Then he walked away. Inside, Eliza did not light the lantern. She moved quickly, checking the window latch, wedging a chair under the door handle, tucking a carving knife beneath her pillow. She did not undress. She sat on the edge of the bed, arms around her knees, and waited. The wind howled, floorboards creaked, then soft steps outside her door. She gripped the knife, muscles tensing. A shadow paused. No knock, no words. Something was placed gently against the door. She waited 5 long minutes before easing forward and opening at a crack. A wool blanket, thick and clean, lay folded on the floor. Beside it, a tin cup of water. She stared at it, then at the empty hallway. Eliza picked up the blanket with both hands. Her throat tightened. Back in the room, she did not sleep, but she pulled the blanket around her shoulders, sat with her back to the wall, and whispered into the silence. "He knew I would not sleep, and still he knocked on nothing." The rain had softened the hard-packed earth into mud, the kind that clung to boots and soaked hems. Eliza stood by the window, watching droplets roll down the glass in crooked lines. Behind her, the room smelled faintly of cedar wood and sun-dried linen, but she barely noticed. Her fingers traced the edge of a small leather-bound notebook. She had begun writing again, short, sharp observations about the man whose house she now lived in. He doesn't speak much, doesn't touch, leaves space. She checked every inch of the ranch in the past week, the barn, the water pump, the back shed with tools aligned like soldiers. There were no locks on her door, but there were latches on the inside. No signs of her being watched, no missing items, nothing to justify the flinch in her spine or the blade she still hid under her pillow. Each morning there was a fresh basin of warm water and a cornbread muffin wrapped in clean cloth outside her door. No knock, no footsteps loud enough to catch, just warmth waiting. At first she thought it a trick, a lure to lower her guard. But the pattern never changed, no questions asked, no favors owed. And Griffin Caldwell, the man of few words and steady hands, made no effort to claim her time or her trust. She'd seen him work methodically, with a rhythm that soothed the horses and quieted the cattle. He moved like he belonged to the land, like silence was just another tool he wielded better than most. Eliza never caught him staring, never heard him sigh with frustration. It was as if her presence didn't shift the orbit of his world, and somehow that made her feel seen more than anything else. One morning it rained. Heavy clouds rolled low, pressing the sky into the earth. Eliza sat on the front steps, knees hugged to her chest beneath the porch awning. She didn't expect company. She certainly didn't expect the quiet sound of boots on wet planks. Griffin appeared, carrying something in one hand, a single white daisy, freshly cut. No explanation, no flourish. He knelt and set it gently on the step beside her. Then he nodded once, turned, and walked back into the curtain of rain. She stared at the flower. In her notebook she wrote, "Why is he kind without asking for anything? I don't understand it. I don't trust it. But I can't stop hoping it's real." That night she didn't wedge the chair under the doorknob. She didn't sleep well, not because of fear, but because her thoughts would not still. Her world had been built on trade, on survival. Everything had a price. And yet this man left gifts and warmth without tallying a debt. He never once asked what happened to her, never asked where she came from or who she used to be. And because of that the words began to stack in her throat like stones, desperate for release. Trust, she realized, was not given in grand gestures. It grew in silence, in the space between questions not asked. And slowly Eliza began to see the difference between a prison and a home. A prison held you still. A home waited for you to move at your own pace. That was Griffin Caldwell's way. Not to pull down the walls she'd built, but to plant something soft along the edge of them, and let it bloom. They came to town only when necessary. Griffin needed feed, oil, and a replacement for the rusted hinge on the barn door. Eliza asked to come along, partly out of curiosity, partly out of a desire to prove she could walk freely beside him, not as property, not as debt. The town of Dry Valley was small, but its whispers were sharp. By the time their boots hit the dusty street, eyes had already turned. "Eliza May Harrow," someone muttered behind a newspaper. The girl sold for $1. "Griffin's charity case," another whispered over their shoulder loud enough for both to hear. Must be more to her than just a face. Eliza pretended not to hear, but her spine stiffened, breath caught halfway. She walked beside Griffin, not behind, not clinging, still, her fingers curled into fists at her sides. Inside the general store, the clerk hesitated before handing over the tin of oil. "Anything else?" he asked Griffin. "No," Griffin said, then glanced once at Eliza. "Unless the lady needs something." The clerk blinked. Eliza shook her head. They left, but it was not over. Outside the saloon, as they passed by on the way back to the wagon, a man leaning on the post tilted his hat back, eyes dark with cheap whiskey and cheaper amusement. "Well, well," he drawled, looking Eliza over like she was a slice of meat. "Didn't think Caldwell had it in him to buy a girl. What did you cost, darling? $1 flat or a dime extra for service?" Eliza stopped, her throat closed, her feet rooted to the street. Griffin was moving before she could even breathe. One step, two. His fist met the man's face with a crack that echoed down the wooden walkway. The drunk stumbled, crashed into the wall, and slumped to the ground. The whole saloon went silent. Griffin did not say a word at first. He stood over the man, chest heaving once, then looked around at the gathering crowd. "I chose to protect her," he said, voice like iron dragged through gravel. "Touch her, speak about her, look at her wrong, and you answer to me." He turned on his heel and walked back to Eliza. She had not moved, not a tear in her eye, not a word on her lips. He tipped his hat to her once and offered his arm. She did not take it, but she walked beside him all the way to the wagon where he lifted the supplies in silence. Not a word was spoken on the ride back. That night Griffin did not ask how she felt. He did not lecture, did not apologize. He fed the horses, cleaned the tools, then went to bed like any other day. But the next morning, when Eliza came into the kitchen, she stopped short. On the table lay a single white chrysanthemum in a small clay jar. Beside it a thick slice of honey bread wrapped in linen, still warm. She touched the flower. Then she sat down and wept. Not loudly, not for long, but the tears fell without shame. For once no one looked at her like she was something broken. No one expected her to prove her worth, or earn her place, or pay back kindness with more than a nod. She wiped her cheeks, picked up the bread, and took a bite. It was sweet, not because of the honey, but because it was given, not owed. And somewhere in her notebook she would later write, "Today I was not someone's burden. I was someone worth standing beside." And though he never said it again, she could still hear Griffin's voice in her mind. "Touch her, and you answer to me." The rain had stopped by midnight, but the clouds still loomed low, swallowing the moon. Eliza slipped out of the ranch house in silence, her boots wrapped in cloth to muffle the sound. She had memorized the creaks in the floorboards, knew which gate hinges winded and which ones held their breath. The lantern she carried was dim, barely enough to cut the darkness. She did not want to be followed. The ride to town was cold, wind pressing through her coat like fingers searching for skin. But she felt nothing, not when the name in her notebook burned brighter than the fear. Horace K. Dinsley, the broker, the one who had smiled when he handed her and her sister over. She remembered his gold tooth, the way he talked about girls like bushels of wheat. She had never known his full name until now. She tied her horse behind the abandoned mill and walked the rest of the way to the town office. The clerk's assistant had mentioned old permit books were kept in a locked cabinet. He had laughed, not knowing she would take that as a map. Inside she found the cabinet, picked the lock with the metal comb in her pocket. Her hands shook only once when she saw the name there. Horace K. Dinsley. Operating permit expired. Last known location, Henderson Gulch. She copied the page quickly, tucked it into her coat, and turned, only to see a shadow waiting at the door. Her breath caught. She reached for the knife in her boot, but the figure stepped forward. Griffin. He held nothing in his hands, no lantern, no gun, just his coat pulled up high, and that same unreadable expression carved into his face. "What? How long?" she began. He cut her off gently. "Since you left the ranch." She swallowed hard. "Why didn't you stop me?" "You needed to go," he said, "and I needed to make sure you made it back." They stood in silence, broken only by the drip of rainwater from the eaves outside. Then Eliza asked, voice low, "Why do you always show up at the right time?" Griffin looked at her for a long moment, not past her, not through her, at her, as if he could see what it cost her to ask. He said, "Because I was too late once. My sister needed me, and I wasn't there. She didn't get another chance. You do." She looked down at the paper in her hand, the proof of the man who had taken everything from her. "Are you going to ask what I plan to do with this?" she whispered. "No," he said simply. "I'll be there, whatever you decide." And she believed him, not because he said it like a vow, but because he had come into that office like a shadow, not to stop her, not to save her, but to walk into the dark beside her. Later, back at the ranch, she would add a line to her notebook. "He does not chase me when I run. He follows, so I will never be alone in the dark." And when she woke the next morning, there was a folded paper beside her bed, a map marked with a trail leading toward Henderson Gulch. No note, no signature, just Griffin's quiet promise written in the language of action. I believe you are worth finding what was lost. The wind came in fierce that night, rattling the window panes and howling like an animal left behind. The ranch house creaked in its old bones, and Eliza could not sleep. She wrapped her shawl tighter, the silence inside louder than the storm. Griffin had not come in for supper. She waited, poured him coffee, left it by the fire, but the cup remained untouched. It was past midnight when she found the door to his room cracked open, the bed untouched, the lamp still full of oil. Her stomach nodded. Then she saw it, the letter, folded, but not hidden any more. She had tucked it between the pages of her notebook days ago, thinking no one would ever read it, thinking no one ever should. She picked it up with trembling hands, but it was already open. There, in her own cramped writing, were the words she had never meant to speak aloud. I once led a girl into the hands of men worse than wolves, just so they would spare my sister. I watched her cry. I said nothing. I thought that was the price of survival. Turns out I paid with my soul. She closed her eyes. Outside, the barn door creaked against the wind. She found him there, sitting on a hay bale, coat draped over his shoulders, staring at the shadows like they might speak some truth he had not heard before. He looked up but said nothing. "I did not mean for you to read that," she said softly. "I know." She took a step closer. "I was 17. I thought they would only scare her, I thought. I did not think enough." Griffin's hands were still, fingers curled around a tin cup of water gone cold. "I'm not who you think I am," Eliza whispered. "You're exactly who I think you are." She blinked. He stood, setting the cup down. "I don't trust pasts," he said, voice quiet but steady. "They're full of things we cannot change and choices made with a gun to the heart." Eliza's breath hitched. "I trust what a person chooses when they can choose," Griffin continued. "You chose to face that man in town. You chose to run toward the truth when you could have kept hiding. And right now you're choosing to tell me the worst thing you've ever done. Number 4. He paused, stepping closer. "That's the only proof I need." Tears slipped down her cheeks, not from guilt, but from the unbearable lightness of being seen and not condemned. "I was sure you'd send me away," she whispered. Griffin shook his head. "You've spent enough time being punished by your own memory." She looked down at her hands. "But I let her into it. That girl, you were a child, and you've lived every day since trying to carry the weight for what those men did. I don't deserve." "You don't have to," he said, interrupting gently. "Deserve is not the point. Grace does not come to the ones who earn it. It comes to those brave enough to admit they need it." Eliza opened her mouth, but no words came. Just a sob she bit down hard, letting it die in her throat. Griffin reached out slowly and placed a hand over hers. Not pulling, not holding, just being there. "I sleep out here," he said, "not because I am angry, but because I needed to remember what it feels like to wait and not walk away." Eliza's lips parted, and she whispered almost too soft to hear. "Thank you." He nodded once. Behind them the wind died down just enough for the world to listen, and somewhere deep in Eliza's chest the storm she had carried for years began to ease, not disappear, but make space, space for something new, something called mercy. The morning started quiet, too quiet. Eliza felt it in her chest before she saw it, a weight like thunder hiding behind the blue sky. She was feeding the hens when the dust cloud rose beyond the fence line. 6 horses, men in dark coats, and among them the face she never forgot. Lyle Brick, the man who took her sister, the man who sold her, the man who smiled like the world owed him its daughters. She dropped the feed bucket. By the time she reached the porch, Griffin had already stepped outside, rifle in hand. "They're not just passing through," he said without turning. "They came for me," Eliza said. Her voice was calm, but her hands were trembling. The group halted at the fence. Lyle called out, his voice oily smug. Well, well, ain't this a sweet little scene? Tell you what, Mr. Caldwell, you give her back, we walk away. Otherwise you'll be buying a funeral next. Griffin didn't answer. He was already scanning, calculating. Behind him, Eliza whispered, They've done this before, they don't bluff. He nodded once, then looked over his shoulder. Can you ride? Eliza's jaw tightened. Try me. Griffin rode hard into Dry Hollow, burst through the sheriff's door like a storm. In minutes 12 ranchers and townsfolk gathered. Griffin did not plead. He did not beg. He told them the truth. They took girls before my sister, his daughter, her cousin. Silence fell. Then one man stepped forward, jaw clenched. They're not taking another. As the sun began to dip, the group rode toward the canyon, the last place Griffin saw their trail. Eliza was already gone, taken, but not silent. From inside the shack where they kept her tied, she had waited, listened, plotted. When one man got close, she spat in his face. When another tried to touch her, she kicked hard enough to knock out his tooth. She was bleeding from the lip, but smiling. You're scared? She hissed. You should be outside. A shout rang out, then gunfire. The first bullet took out the lantern. Darkness dropped like a curtain. The second hit a wall. Chaos erupted. Griffin stormed in, rifle raised, heart slamming. He saw Eliza in the corner, still tied, fighting off a man twice her size with her knee in her teeth. He fired. The man dropped. Griffin rushed to her, cutting ropes fast. You all right? Behind you, she cried. Griffin spun. Too late. A gun rose behind him, but before the shot rang out, Eliza threw herself forward, tackling the man. The gun went off. Pain lanced through her side. Griffin caught her as she fell. No, 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 he muttered, hands pressing to her waist, now slick with blood. Her breath came sharp but steady. He cupped her face. Eliza, talk to me. She smiled through gritted teeth. You asked if I was all right. Are you? I am now, she whispered. Now I know why you waited so long. You were waiting for me to be ready. His throat clenched. She touched his cheek. You always come for me. He kissed her forehead. I always will. Outside, the last of the gunfire faded. The night held its breath. But inside, in the arms of the man who never promised anything and never let her fall, Eliza finally felt what she had never dared believe in. Home. Spring came slow, but it came. The earth softened, the frost retreated, and green things dared to grow again. Eliza knelt in the garden behind the house, fingers caked with soil, her old dress speckled with dried mud. She had planted every seed herself, coaxed every bloom from dirt that once bore nothing but weeds. Today, the first daisies opened, white, wild, and proud. She gathered a handful, brushing the petals with a touch lighter than her old self would have known. There was no mirror nearby, but if there had been, she might have paused, not at beauty, but at peace. For the first time, she did not feel like a burden someone had chosen to bear. She felt like someone who stayed because she belonged. Behind her, the porch creaked. Griffin stood there, not in his usual worn leather or trail-dusted boots, but in a faded white shirt. The collar was stiff, though not ironed, and the sleeves were rolled to his forearms. He held something small in his hands, a wooden box, smoothed and unadorned. He didn't say anything at first, just stepped down from the porch and sat beside her on the low step, elbows on his knees, looking out at the soft waves of prairie swaying golden in the late sun. You remember what you said when I untied you? He asked. Eliza kept her gaze forward, hands still wrapped around the stems. I said you'd regret choosing me. Griffin nodded. You said you were broken, a mess, someone not worth waiting on. She didn't deny it. He opened the box. Inside was a silver ring, plain, no stone, no shine. The metal was rough in places, bearing the marks of having been worked by hand. I made this from the shoe of the first horse you saved, he said. Didn't think I'd keep it, but I did like I kept you. Emmer want to do. She looked down. Her lips parted, but no words came. "I don't want to own you, Eliza. I never did, but I'd like to walk beside you if you'll let me. Not to fix you, just to be yours, if that's something you want." Eliza touched the ring. Her fingers trembled. The scent of daisies rose between them, faint but insistent. "I never thought I'd be asked," she said. "Not like this. You're not being asked for what you can do or what you survived, just for who you are now." She let the flowers fall to her lap, both hands clasping his. Tears welled up, blurring the ring, the man, the world, but her voice didn't shake when she answered. "I'm not sure I'll be any good at being someone's wife." Griffin smiled, slow and quiet. "Then we'll learn together, and if you still whisper instead of speak, I'll keep listening, however long it takes." The ring slid onto her finger. It was cool, imperfect, and more precious than any treasure ever offered with pomp or gold. They stood, not speaking, and moved toward the open field. There was no band, no preacher, no witnesses, only the sky above, endless and wide, and the hush of wind carrying spring's breath. Griffin held her close. They swayed together, barely moving. Eliza rested her head against his chest. No one watched. Nothing needed to be proven. Only one thing mattered, she whispered. Softer than before, but sure now. "This time I choose to stay." And that's how a $1 girl and a quiet rancher rewrote the meaning of love under the wide, wild sky. If Eliza and Griffin's story touched your heart, if you felt the weight of their scars, the warmth of that silver ring, and the whisper that changed everything, go ahead and tap that hype button. Don't forget to subscribe to Wild West Love Stories for more tales of grit, romance, and redemption in the untamed American frontier. Because out here, love ain't always loud, but it's always worth fighting for.